Hello, everybody. You're very welcome tonight to the very first of our autumn ILMI social nights. We're really excited to have Mr. Phil Friend here tonight, who's going to be in conversation with Mr. Peter Kearns, our beautiful on-site coordinator. I'm just here to do a little bit of tech help for you, and just to tell you guys that I'm going to put the questions that Peter is going to be asking Phil in the chat function. And the chat will last about 40 minutes or 50 minutes. And then we're going to open the chat function. If you have any questions, if you pop them into it, and we can have a chat afterwards. Okay, I can read out the questions. Please, if you could keep yourself on mute. Not that you're making noise at all. I know you wouldn't. It's just, it sounds like you're right beside us, and if it's not on mute. So thank you so much, everybody. Without further ado, we're going to go to Peter, and he will introduce Mr. Phil Friend. Thank you.
Hi everybody. As I said before, the Dublin Killock actually is a bit rough. I hope to make it loose later on, a few leaps and points later on tonight. But I'm really delighted to have Phil here tonight. Myself and Phil have been communicating for the past few months, well before the summer, so we built this stage quite a while back, and delighted to we could get Phil live for an Irish audience, especially an Irish disabled activist audience, like you are most here tonight. So where you are, instead of me giving any background to the Not Dead Yet movement, it'd be better if I just ask a broad question from Phil, and he can give the background to Not Dead Yet. So as Dr. James Casey said, I'm going to ask 3 questions, and then with 50 minutes to go, 20 minutes to go, we're going to open it up to your chat questions. But one promise I have is that I promise Phil is that we're going to finish at 8 o'clock sharp, if that's okay. So Phil, are you ready to go?
Yep, sure, yeah.
I said to Phil that anytime he doesn't understand my Dublin accent, just pretend he does. That we'll try and get away with it. So Phil, what prompted you and your colleague to set up Not Dead Yet in 2006?
I think, well, first of all, thank you, Peter, for the welcome, and thanks everybody for taking time out to tune in and listen to what we're going to talk about. It might be just helpful to reinforce the fact that I'm a disabled person myself. I had polio as a child, so I've been disabled for centuries. And like many disabled people, I relied enormously on healthcare and other professionals for my early life to survive. I was in an iron lung for 6 months, and without that I would have died, and doctors and others. So this matters later on in the conversation, but I just want to give you some background. Why did we form Not Dead Yet UK? Well, actually, the person who formed it really was Jane Campbell, who was Jane Campbell back then. She's now Baroness Jane Campbell. I'm sure many people in Ireland will have heard of her. She's a very famous activist in England and UK. And she became increasingly alarmed about the way in which the lives of disabled people were seen to be disposable. I know that this is the independent living movement of Ireland. We had independent living movements in England, and Jane Campbell was one of the leading voices in that movement. And what was the point of fighting for independence if people regarded your life as worthless and of no use and whatever? And of course, being disabled, as we all know, is a terrible thing to have to endure. And wouldn't it be much better if we all died? Because that would be much easier for me and for everybody else. So I think there were a number of high profile cases in the UK. The most famous one probably at that time was Diana Pretty, who was a woman who had multiple sclerosis, she wanted to get the court to allow her partner to end her life when she chose to end it. And that didn't make the statute books. It's been a continuous fight ever since. Every 2 or 3 years, our opponents, which are mainly now called Dignity in Dying, which is a very interesting title. It was formerly the Voluntary Euthanasia Society, but of course that doesn't sound quite so sexy as Dignity in Dying. So they're the main protagonists. They're very well funded. They've got a lot of power and scope. They have very famous people in their group. And we are basically not dead yet. It's active. The people that help run it are probably 6 of us. So we're a very small organization, punches way above our weight. But I think, Peter, the short answer, sorry, this is a long one. The short answer is that we became incredibly alarmed. Jane Campbell in particular became incredibly alarmed about the way in which society simply thought that disabled people's lives were not worth living, and they would make statute to allow us to end it. And finally, I think it's recognized both here and in Ireland, of course, that life, if somebody is in huge distress for whatever reason, everything is done to try and help them come through that distress and then live a full and active life. Why would the 12 million disabled people in the UK be excluded from that kind of thinking? That's really where we're at. So I hope that answers the question. But yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And just to get that history down in terms of Ireland, it's what was there. We again, we're always some years behind Britain in terms of activism, and it's interesting that we had a similar court case going to our High Court and Supreme Court with the same impairment story, you know, and also a woman as well. So I remember the case in Britain, thinking that hopefully couldn't happen here, but it did happen here as well. And also, again, the organisation behind the end of life choices, dying with dignity, there are quite a big organisation behind it, and it has a lot of traction in the media in Ireland, and a lot of traction with liberals and quite people who think they're quite progressive. But like on a lighter side, why is it called Not Dead Yet?
Do you know, I've no idea. I think because we defy all the odds, you know, disabled people just refuse to die. I mean, that's basically what it's about.
Has any connection with Monty Python?
I know if you put into a search engine "Not Dead Yet," you end up with some kind of quite weird rock band that wear lots of sort of crosses on their arms and whatever. Do you know, Peter, that's a really good question. I'm going to have to go away and try and find it. I've never really thought. It just, we all love the name. It's you know, Not Dead Yet UK. Despite your best efforts, we are not dead yet. You know?
If anybody has can to look at Monty Python's Holy Grail. Yes. I'm not dead yet. You will be.
I think my favorite, I mean, I know we're not on this, but I love the knight who has his arms chopped off and says, you know, come back, you cow. And then he has his legs chopped. I mean, we're creating a disabled person in front of us in that film. And he refuses to lie down. I mean, it's brilliant.
He still wants to bite him. And just to tell the audience, Phil has we kept Phil in touch with the progress of the Irish Dying with Dignity bill, and also Phil has seen the ILMI blogs that we produce in the spring, and the policy paper as well. So So at the moment, there's a dying with Gino Kenny, the TD, the parliamentary bill has stopped giving work stock during the summer, and it's hoped that the Oireachtas, the Dáil, will set up a platform where we discuss. But before we get to the future or activists and the relationship with dying with dignity, I just want to ask a question. It's kind of a broad question. What for you and not their colleagues? What is the difference between assisted dying and assisted suicide?
Okay. Well, first of all, Not Dead Yet UK does not recognise the term assisted dying. We do not use that term because it's not what's being legislated for or argued for. So let's try and make a distinction. If somebody has terminal cancer, and let's assume for the moment that everybody's agreed that they only have hours or days to live, they are in the process of dying. And somebody, a nurse, a doctor, may well at that point make them more comfortable, make sure that they're pain free. And the act of doing that may assist their death. That's assisted dying. Assisted suicide, in our view, is I am not dying. I have a condition, let's say motor neurone disease, because that's often the group that are people with MS and people with motor neurone disease are often used as examples of where the act, a bill should be passed. So they have motor neurone disease. They're clearly very, very severely disabled. They are losing their abilities, but they're not dying. So if they say to somebody, I want you to help me die, they are assisting a suicide. That's what they're doing, because if the person were capable, they would do it themselves. So the reason that somebody asks for assisted suicide is because they haven't got the physical means to do it themselves. So we're making a real distinction between assisted dying and assisted suicide. And I think the other thing that we should say at this point is that our campaigns are always about a law change. They are not about whether people should have the right to die or not. They're not about the religious angles of all of that, which I know many people will have very devout views about. Our view is very simple. We oppose a change in the law on assisted suicide. Assisted dying has been around for years. There's no law against assisted dying. It's simply an act of helping somebody who is clearly about to die. Now, 6 months, we often hear this term, 6 months. How can you say that somebody's dying when there's 6 months ahead? We've got so many examples where people lived for 3, 4, 5 years afterwards. So I don't know if that helps, but I think our distinction is that assisted dying is very separate and different from assisted suicide, where you are physically helped to take your own life. That's an active engagement. Macmillan nurses in the UK, for example, my brother died of cancer. I was with him when he died. So were the Macmillan nurses. They made him very comfortable. He died. And now I have no doubts in my mind that some of the medications that he was administered, which were definitely about helping him be pain-free and so on and more comfortable, helped him to die. I'm convinced of it. But that wasn't the act. They weren't doing that to end his life. So there'd be something very different. I hope that kind of clarified things, Peter.
Yeah, that's very much similar to everybody thinking that choice is already there in terms of assisted dying, and that the assisted what's called terms done with dignity is actually assisted suicide. And in my discussions with the proponents of time with dignity, the argument is not to call it assisted suicide because
Well, assisted dying is a nice cuddly term, isn't it? Assisted suicide's a bit more stark. So well, that's why Dignity in Dying changed their name. They were called the Voluntary Euthanasia Society. Well, that's really nice. I love that name. So what did they do? They changed it to Dignity in Dying. The medication that's used in places like Dignitas is the same as is used in the death cells in American prisons. So that, you know, when you start talking about things in that rather blunt, stark way, it changes this rather romantic view of somebody being gracefully led by the hand into a room where they're going to be violins will play and they'll have whatever they have and it'll all be soft focus and there'll be no mess involved, no pain, no nothing. It's not so. That's not the process. And I think what our opponents want to do is to paint a picture of a death which is wonderful and peaceful and calm and pleasurable, as opposed to, you know, dying in agony, which is, of course, what's often used as a particularly in some. I mean, for goodness sake, I'm not here to say that you know, some people don't go through terrible difficulties towards the ends of their life. Of course they do. We know that. My brother did, for example, but that doesn't mean we bring in a law that would then put hundreds of thousands of non-dying people at risk, which is what we're talking about here.
And just on that point, in terms of the idea of the law and creating I hate to use that cliche, the cliche of the slippery slope, you know. In Ireland and in the UK, that slope is not there yet. But if it did exist, then disabled people would have to ask the question, should I stay alive? Am I a burden? Because research by yourself and research by not dead yet in the States, and also clinicians in the States, it's very clear. Arguments around pain is never, it's not at the top of the list for assisted suicide. It's disabled people who are concerned about being a burden, being a problem. They can't see a future. And also in my own experience and some of our activists, this time of dignity discourse, I've encountered people who are friends of mine and on the left, and you know, I'm an atheist and a bit of comedy myself, but in the last year, they found it quite non-disabled people have found it quite comfortable to come up to you and say, if I was you, I'd kill myself. And that discourse didn't exist before the damaging the discussion. So have you found that in the UK too?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really difficult as a disabled person to take on board is the fact that the rest of society doesn't think you have any great value and that actually your life is not worth living. There are people listening to us who've done some extraordinary things in their lives, extraordinary things. There are also people listening to us who've done ordinary things. You know, they've raised kids, they've worked, they've lived a life with their neighbors and their friends. They've contributed to the local communities in ways. Now, they did that with cerebral palsy or multiple sclerosis or schizophrenia or whatever it was. The idea that disabled people, this mantra that goes on all the time about disabled people being brave and courageous, Well, some are, of course, but the majority of us aren't brave and courageous. We just get on with it because that's what life's about. You get on with it. And I've never been divorced. I've met lots of people who are, and I think the way they've managed that is pretty amazing. If somebody said to me, well, I've just had a divorce, I say, oh, life can't be worth living. Do you want assisted suicide? You know, I don't know. I feel sorry for people who've been divorced, just as they feel sorry for me because I'm sitting in a wheelchair. For Christ's sake, we can't go on living a life which says that some groups are more disposable than others because you think their lives aren't valuable. What a load of crap that is. I think what I know what you're trying to do here with this organization is to change the way people perceive disabled people. We all talk about the social model. The social model is very clear. Our problem is you lot. Yeah. It's not us. Yeah. Our problem is the fact you keep building bloody stairs everywhere and you keep having attitudes which mean we should all be dead by Friday. That's our problem. Now, you know, I'll go away and deal with polio if you'll let me, while you bloody will make sure that the school and the bus and everything else are accessible. That's what it's about. Now, when we've got all that achieved, now let's talk about whether I want to die or not. And your point you've made very powerfully, Peter. The American experience in Oregon particularly has been that the most serious reason people give for wanting to end their lives is they don't want to be a burden. Yeah. They don't want to be a burden to the loved ones they have, to their friends and neighbors and others. They don't want to be a burden. Well, if we can provide the support and the services that the family needs to care for that individual, then they would feel less of a burden and therefore QED less likely to want to die. And also, since when has death been a treatment option? Yeah. Since when has death been a treatment option? I'm feeling a burden. Well, here's your treatment. Take these pills, you won't feel a burden anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, you won't be anymore. So, you know,
that idea of the burden, if an undisabled person starts saying they feel like a burden, they're offered quite a lot of support to explore that and to give the long-term support to get beyond that point.
Yes, you know. And we, I'm sure this is true in Ireland. It's certainly true in Great Britain, that we invest a lot of money, time, and resources into trying to help people avoid suicide. Yeah. You know, the Samaritans are a great example. The Samaritans do a fantastic job of trying to help people survive huge distress, depression, whatever it is. Why wouldn't disabled people benefit from that same kind of approach, as opposed to saying, you know, one of the most scary recent pieces of data that we're beginning to see happening, the Canadian experience. Canada has passed a law, as I'm sure you all know, about 6 years ago. They've changed it 3-4 times since then to include more and more impairment groups. And now what they're realizing is the economic benefits of this. They are now producing data which shows that assisted suicide is cheaper than palliative care. Well, we all know that. But we're back to the way disabled people's lives are viewed. Because we're viewed as worthless, then why would you spend millions on palliative care? Much cheaper to give them a few pills. Save everybody the problem. Yeah. So you've got a real economic, and we know what economics does to this. There's no way round me. I can't argue against the fact that giving me a handful of pills is cheaper than spending £50,000 a year on looking after me for the next 10 years. It's a no-brainer.
And in America, as you probably know, Oregon, there's also some especially like Colorado and all that. There's that insurance companies are now saying to people with long-term impairment labels that are seen as closer to death or cancer, motor neuron. Insurance companies saying we won't pay for your treatment, but
Yes.
we will pay for your assisted dying, or
Yes.
you know. So yeah,
That's horrendous.
Yeah.
That is horrendous. I mean, at least in the UK, we've got, you know, the National Health Service, and we don't have to rely on an insurance organisation to pay for our treatment. But having said that, it's worth remembering what happened. I don't know what the experience has been like in Ireland. I bet it's not been very different to the experience in the UK, Great Britain. The COVID wreaked. 6 out of 10 of the deaths in Great Britain were disabled people.
Yeah.
6 out of 10. I mean, that is extraordinary. What does that say to us about the importance of our lives compared to others? The fact that Great Britain discharged people with COVID into residential care settings, which then led to the deaths of the residents living there. What does that say to us about our value and our worth? So these things are all linked. Societal views about us are linked. And what they think about assisted suicide is they're doing us a kindness. They're doing us a kindness. They don't want, you know, they just don't want us to suffer. One of the big problems, I think, Peter, we both have, and Ireland and GB, is it is very difficult to campaign to leave things as they are.
Yeah, yeah.
Most campaigns are about changing things for the, in quotes, better. Here we are saying, look, the law's fine as it is. Just leave it alone.
And just on that point, and you brought the Canadian experience, and it's great to see disabled Canadian activists really trying to fight back against that. But because the law came in 6 years ago, but still it's getting broader and broader. So disabled activists are on the back foot, trying to campaign, trying to find ways that within the system, trying to stop this. In terms of the UK not yet moving, how did you campaign in terms of the British system? Where did you focus your energy? Because it's such a broad area, it'd be easy to get distracted to all different platforms. But where did you focus your energy? Where in the system did you find the best focal points to concentrate your resources?
I think we're still learning. I mean, we're still trying to figure out the best use of very meager resources. How do you target? So if you say start with the general public, it's an impossible task. You couldn't do it. The media, both social and public media, you know, the broadcast media, having the ability to influence some of the stories that go there is worth some effort. If you've got people amongst your teams, your supporters, who know the odd journalist and so on. By that, I don't mean the odd journalist, I mean the occasional journalist. But it's fraught. I think my answer to your question would be that we've realized that public demonstrations have a place, but they need to be very targeted. So we tend, and because for many disabled people, going on a demo is a physical nightmare, but as many people as can mustering at the legislative building and making the, I don't know what you call them in Ireland, but you know, at the equivalent of our MPs, they have to run the gauntlet of disabled people sitting there saying, so you want to kill us, do you? That's what you're going to vote on, is it? I think concentrating on the legislators, having a good legal team, lawyers who get it, who can argue line by line. We've done that. We are very fortunate. We've got Jane Campbell, who sits in the House of Lords, who has resources like lawyers. So when we've had previous appeals, we did bring a judicial review of our own, and we gave evidence at it. That's very unusual. So I think what we've been picking up, Peter, is that with small resources, you have to target them very carefully. And the people who are going to change the law are your legislators. So you've got to somehow provide them with good reasons to stay on your side. And that's education, that's giving them your side of the story. It's exposing them to thoughts and ideas that they're not getting from our opponents. What they're getting from our opponents is the violins and the soft lighting and all that stuff. What they're not getting is the harsh realities. And the alternative to assisted suicide, I'm sure for all of us, is better services, better palliative care, more respect, those kinds of things. So in summary, I would say, if you had to go for one group, it would be the parliamentarians, or your equivalent of parliamentarians.
Oh, yeah. Okay, because that links to my final question, and because in time within the bill, which was kicked off in 2020, so quite recent, and it was only stopped during the summer. And the Joint Committee on Justice in their Parliament, the Dáil, is now saying there should be a special committee established to undertake an examination of the topic. And so, so that's been. I like to think that we had a part to play in that just stopping the bill going so fast, so that it could easily have been become law this year, but at least stop the moment. So just my last question is that what kind of capacity building ourselves, like the disabled person organisation, the GPO, like independent living movement, what kind of capacity building could we do with activists to get them ready to take a proactive part in that special committee?
Well, Not Dead Yet UK is a DPO, and we've attracted, we've got 160 DPOs as members of ours. We don't have committees, we don't have any structures or hierarchies, none of that. I'm called a convener. You could have had someone else coming on your discussion tonight instead of me. It would have been somebody else. So we're a DPO, we're run by disabled people. We regard the DPOs as crucial, as fundamental to this whole debate. So they must, I mean, the classic 80s and 90s mantra of nothing about us without us. I'm sure many of you remember that. We've rebirthed it, you know.
The independent living movement, that is still a mantra, nothing about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So in terms of your legislator forming a committee to explore this subject in much more detail, you have to have the DPOs with you. And what we've been doing with them, because many of them don't have resources either, is we, for example, written letters which we've sent to them for them to write and add their names to, or that kind of thing. This COVID has done one thing for us that's been really useful, and that's Zoom. The ability for me to talk to you tonight, I would never have been able to come across to Ireland, or you to come to me. It wouldn't have happened. But we can do this stuff without any real costs attached, apart from the subscription, and get to hundreds and hundreds of people. So we're looking at ways of we held a webinar at the beginning of the Meacher, when the Meacher bill was announced. We held a webinar which we had 50, without too much difficulty, 50 of the leading activists in the UK signing up to that. What we then did was to do a quick survey of them to say, what are your skills? What do you think you'd be able to contribute? That kind of stuff. We then made a list of their different skill sets, put their name. So now when the media come to us and say, we want to do a story on X, I've got like 8 names that I can just give them and they can do. So you can do some of that kind of background structure or infrastructure work, so that when you go into those conversations with those parliamentarians in the Dáil, you've got your arguments all lined up and you know what you're going to say. And you've had goes at identifying who the supporters are in the Dáil, who are not. It's a lot of it's research. It's finding out where the buttons are that you can press to get your views heard. Final bit from me. What we do know is this: if you sit down people who, but broadly speaking, support assisted suicide, if you sit down with them, and people like all of us on this call tonight share our stories as to why we don't think that's a good idea, many of them will change their mind. Many of them, because they don't get the argument from us. They think it's a kindness. The number of times I've heard, well, we wouldn't let a dog suffer like this. I am not a bloody pet. I'm a human being. So it's kind of trying to get the general public to see that there is another side to this conversation, which they're very largely unaware of.
Yeah.
Now, very difficult to do that when you've got very limited resources. So back to my, get ready for this select committee or whatever it's called in the Dáil, and really resource yourselves to make a good fist of it there, because that's where you, if you win that, then you'll probably win the argument.
Yeah, thanks for that. Great. I'm delighted with your comments and your observations. I think we have 29 activists here tonight, so it's quite good turnout of people who will be proactive in taking that argument to the right spaces. But on that point, you'd be glad to hear that that was my last question. But I'll hand you over, Phil, I'll hand you over to Dr. James Casey. He had a few questions from the audience, and but I'm going to be very strict, guys. We're definitely finishing out your talk, because I can see the sun disappearing, and I have to get down to a pub, right?
Leitrim's in a different time zone.
I'll come back at about 5 to 8 and just summarize and make sure that Phil can get to the pub too. Yeah. So James, you okay?
Yeah, thanks a million. Thank you very much, Phil. That was tremendous. We've got some great questions here. So I'm just going to go through the ones that popped in, not in any the order that they came in, if that's okay.
Sure.
And Anne-Marie Flanagan, one of our board members, says she's thrilled this conversation is happening. And she's wondering, how can we support people's choice to die and drive the right to live as well?
Do you know, I would be amazed if the choice issue didn't come up, because for me, and I'm sure for all of us, this is the difficult question, because independent living is about exercising free choice. It's about choosing to do what you want to do. And here I am saying we shouldn't be allowed, people shouldn't be allowed to kill us. But the contra argument is, well, but I want to die. And I can't do it myself. So you're restricting my choices. This is I have no straight answer for this question. What I do know is that if I change the law to allow that to happen for you, I am putting thousands upon thousands of other people at risk. So in this particular case, you exercising your choice is going to have an impact on everybody else. And therefore, but this is so difficult, because everyone listening to us tonight, it is about disabled people having the right to choose the way they go about living and dying. And here I am saying, yeah, but I have no answer other than to say that laws that are based on an individual are generally not good laws. And we have to find ways of helping people who feel so desperate, because if you're feeling that you must end your life, then something is very wrong. And we have to try and figure out ways of doing that. And I think palliative medicine has got so much better in the last 10, 15 years. So the fear of choking to death, for example, or being in agony are gradually receding. The burden thing we talked about, Peter and I, that's another big issue. So if we can attack those things, my sense of it is that people are less likely to feel so desperate that they want someone else to kill them.
Thanks.
But it's a really difficult question.
Thanks a million, Phil. That's fantastic. Sorry, Emery. I just go to the other. We just go to the other. We some great questions. I just want to make sure that we get through them. It's a really good one here, actually, from Fiona Weldon. Fiona's a colleague of ours. She asked, "What about supporting disabled people not to internalize ableism?"
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, as part of my own career, I used to run a lot of training programs for disabled people we called personal development programs. And one of the aspects, this was a 3-day residential course, one of the aspects of this training was to recognize, I wrote a book with a colleague called Why Are You Pretending to Be Normal? And the Why Are You Pretending to Be Normal is based on the idea that disabled people should not want to be who they are. They should fit in with everybody else. They should, and I, for one, until I was in my late 30s, I was running a lot. I was a qualified social worker. I was a wheelchair user, but I had no connections whatsoever with disability at all. And then I met a woman who said, "Why are you pretending to be normal?" And that changed my life, which is why I called the book. I had internalized the view that my disability was a negative, and therefore I didn't talk about it. After a conversation with her, I realized that I am who I am because of my disability, not in spite of it. I am doing what I'm doing because I see the world like this, and that's valuable. So internalizing ableism is a hugely powerful driver for people, that they want to be like everyone else. I don't know how organizations like yours and mine can change that, but we ought to, when we rub shoulders with people who see the world through the lenses that we don't quite understand, we ought to try and tackle them on it. It's interesting, isn't it? We have Black Power and we have gay pride, and then there's the disabled lot. All they want is cure, you know. Well, actually, we tried to cure gay people. Look at where that got us, you know. And Black people, we tried that with slavery and all that rubbish. And the pride that people have in their heritage, the pride they have is phenomenal.
Okay.
Disabled people need to feel the same.
Thanks a million, Phil. That's fantastic. I'm sorry, there was just a bit of Clive, can you keep an eye on that, please? There's just a bit of feedback there from somebody. That was brilliant. Yeah, it is about disability pride. And I think it's interesting in Ireland now at the moment, and what the collective has done over the last couple of years. When the public were thinking that we were all dying in our beds, instead we were coming into spaces like this, and there's a women's group, there's an LGBT group, there's a PAS service group, and there's all these different spaces where we created for ourselves. And I think that's exciting. It's almost like a hidden world to the general public. I have another great question from Fionn and Jonathan Angus, and they ask, do you see the UK policy that allows late-term abortion when severe fetal abnormality, inverted commas, including Down syndrome, cleft lip, club foot, etc., is being linked to your campaign to reject assisted suicide, or a completely unrelated issue?
I've always taken the view, and again, I don't hold any religious or faith-based issues here. I've always taken the view that terminating a pregnancy for grounds of disability is a big problem for me. But I also believe that women should have the right to decide what they do with their own bodies, for example. So I'm in a bit of a dilemma here. But I think what's interesting for me about the abortion law is that it started with very strict parameters, and it's now ended up where it's ended up, where we've got full-term pregnancies being ended with a prediction of Down syndrome and so on and so forth. Where I see the link is with assisted suicide. We'll start with a piece of legislation which may have very tight restrictions around it, and then 3 years later, somebody will say, well, that's not working, let's do this, and off we go. And I think the abortion law in that sense is something that is a good kind of metaphor for what we're worried about. In terms of disabled children not making it into the world simply because of their disabilities, I have real issues with that. I think, again, though, we have to be sure that families who decide that they are going to have a disabled child have all the support and the care and the resources they need to ensure that that young person has a fulfilled and meaningful life. I mean, I do think that's true too. And I think many families make these horrific decisions looking at a world where they know they're not going to get that support and where they are going to be left on their own. So it's a very tricky one, but I personally think that grounds for ending the life of somebody on the basis of a disability has never sat very comfortably with me.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Phil. I know we've one last question, if that's okay, just to throw at you. It's been tremendous up to now. It's been really enjoyable evening. We do appreciate you being here. James Brosnan asks, I think, is assistive suicide another form of euthanasia? Yeah.
Simply answered. Now we can all go out the pub. Yeah. I think euthanasia is where you administer a lethal something or other, isn't it? And I think that what you do in assisted suicide is the same thing. It's you're requesting it. That's the way it works in most of the jurisdictions. And a doctor gives you the medication, or somebody else does, and that's euthanasia. But mercy killing, yes, is what it used to be called.
It certainly was mercy killing. I mean, there was a thin line between what happened in 1939 to 1945 to anything else. You know, I mean, that's it. I mean, I know it's an bit of choice, but you know, Action T4 is something that's only been talked about. Now, Action T4, for anyone that didn't understand, is where the Holocaust began. It was like a test ground where they just wiped out. It was actually one of the few things in which there was some opposition in Germany against it. When they started popping off the veterans, they didn't like it with the crosses of iron.
I mean, so, half a million disabled people were gassed, as were gay people and people in mental institutions and gypsies, travelers, other people. It was horrendous. And I think one of the things we haven't talked about tonight is that, although I mentioned it very early on in my introduction, that, you know, my life has been largely, the relationship throughout my life I've had with doctors has been a very positive one. I've always seen them as being on my team, wanting to help me the best way they could. If we now allow doctors to be part of ending my life, where does that leave the relationship? And it sounds weird to suggest, but the death camps in the Holocaust were managed to some degree by medical professionals. So, you know, the idea that Harold Shipman in Great Britain killed hundreds of patients. So, you know, this idea that we're safe in some regards, and I'm making a huge generalization here. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that doctors are out to get me. I know that's not true, but we are putting them in a really difficult position, because what we're saying is your duty to preserve life at all costs is going to change, and the Hippocratic Oath and all that kind of stuff. And we know that in GB that a lot of doctors, the Meacher Bill proposes a kind of conscientious objection clause. So what that then means is that your own doctor may object to doing this. So you go and see a strange doctor who hasn't got a clue who you are. So the ideas of safeguards about things like your mental health, your mental capacity, whether you made a choice freely and all that kind of stuff. How would a doctor who doesn't know you know that? It wouldn't. So it's a very difficult one. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Phil. That's our questions done from the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So my face is back on screen. So if when I contacted you back in the spring, I was looking forward to it, but it's broken beyond what we actually hope for. Like your input, you covered so much tonight, you're doing fantastic. But I think that not only just the history and not the idea, and the international connection with America and Canada as well, but also your ideas around where we can go next in terms of focusing your energies and focusing your resources, and also capacity building activists to take the argument and discourse to the non-disabled platforms and special committees. So I think you're right. As soon as you sit down with non-disabled people who think language dignity is a good thing, and you hear arguments, you do like any human argument, it becomes more interesting as well. You know, and it's not a simple good bad argument. It's open to the discussion is what is to be human, and what is to have a just a normal ordinary life. You know, and the danger, I think there's the danger, which is idea is that we could go back to the idea of supercuts, today people wanting to prove that they shouldn't be kicking the bucket. You know, they have to create, they have to get their value from non-disabled people. So it's quite obvious tonight that, again, another disabled activist like you is recognizing the value of this collective disabled DPO action. You know, and that's what we hope to promote the role of the DPO in this discourse as well. So thanks, Phil, and I promise to finish by 8. And so, is any closing thoughts before we stop at 8 o'clock?
Well, firstly, thank you for asking me to come and meet you and talk with you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that. I think I'm very struck by the fact that for many of our forebears, the disabled people that went before us, lived in institutions, if they lived anywhere.
Yeah.
Their lives were pretty unbearable, I suspect. And then along came the 60s, 70s and 80s, and a bunch of hoodlums in wheelchairs decided that independent living was what we should be doing. So we chained ourselves to everything, and suddenly we got buses that worked, and we suddenly found ourselves living in a community. And now along comes some people who say, well, it's time to die. Well, thank you very much. I've only just got out of jail. I mean, what's going on? So I think we've got a bit of a fight on our hands.
Yeah.
I would certainly urge, I totally get the DPO stuff. And I certainly would urge that you in Ireland look at forming a group that's dedicated to fighting changes in the law. Let's be clear here, we're not fighting assisted suicide. We're fighting a change in the law. That's what we're fighting. Yeah. We're not getting involved in the moral, ethical debates. This is simply about a change in the law because we feel unsafe. If that law changes, we feel unsafe. At the moment, if somebody tries to kill me, there will be an investigation. If the law goes through, there will be no investigation. So my final thoughts are, thank you so much. I wish you all well. And you can bet your life, if we can help you, if I and Jane and others in the Not Dead Yet UK group can help you as you start campaigning your own issues, then just let us know. We'll do what we can to help.
Okay, I'd say when the special committee gets off the ground, we might ask you and your colleagues back and then another social evening. So thanks, Phil, and really appreciate it. And thanks for asking one to the discussions we had. So, good night, everybody.